Hello, Encounter, and Merry Christmas. We are not having a Christmas Eve service in person today. Normally, we don't do it just because, being a city church, most of us are traveling and visiting family and spending Christmas somewhere else. However, this year, I don't know, I felt like in light of particularly like the rise of the Omicron variant, some of you may be at home. Some of you might not have had a chance to travel. Some of you, might not feel comfortable going to a Christmas Eve service somewhere. We wanted to provide something to help you reflect and think on the deeper, meaning and reality of the day. So this is not like a full-on Christmas service, but I want to just offer a short reflection and some thoughts about today, and just we'll have a couple of songs that we recorded last year when we were doing like online services all the time. And my hope is that that helps you get into the Christmas spirit, and that it helps you have a good Christmas in spite of all of the craziness around us going on. um if I'm honest with you, my number one question last 2 years, spiritually speaking, is, where are you, God? And I know that might be weird that the pastor is asking that question. You're like, okay, I'm asking that question. I thought you knew, so why am I listening to you? Listen, I, I think it's a fair question to ask. And I'll be the first one to offer all of the theologically nuanced understanding of God's sovereignty and divine providence, and how God is working in the midst of the crazy circumstances. I've preached those sermons. I believe in those sermons. But the reality is also that, these 2 years have been hard and difficult, and we've seen so much suffering and pain, and not only, COVID, but everything else that's happened. And, you look at that and you look at, all of the bad data. And at the same time, as Christians, we have this understanding of God, who is a being who loves us and cares us and wants to redeem the world and save the world, and that has all the power to do anything he wants to do, right? And the two things seem to not line up. And you actually you end up, coming to a couple of conclusions, but a lot of times the number one conclusion is, I don't necessarily doubt God's, power, but I kind of just wonder, why doesn't he do anything? Is he just sitting there looking at all the brokenness going on and not intervening because he doesn't want to? There's this line in the book of Job. You know the story of Job. Job is this guy that, his life is perfect and everything's great until it isn't. And when his life falls apart, he doesn't know why, and he's angry at God, and he's, asking all these questions. And there's this line that he calls God. He says, like, where are you? He says, you tireless watcher of humanity. Which I think it's the closest that the Bible comes to, like, calling God a name or something. It's this very like raw language that you see. But I think it's a point that a lot of times it feels like God is just watching and not doing anything. And that can be frustrating. That can mess with our faith. That can mess with our understanding of God. That can mess with our emotions. If God is ultimately our only hope, what is God doing, right? And this is not true only of, the last 2 years and the pandemic, but, that's true of life experience, right? For some of you, that's true when your marriage imploded and you thought this person that you were going to spend the rest of your life with, you're not. Or when you got the bad news from the doctor, or when you had this, dream of the life that you were going to build, and you find yourself in a completely different life. It's nothing like that. I've been open about the struggles I've had with anxiety and with depression in the past, and in my darkest moments when things were really hard and difficult, I ask myself that question often: God, where are you? Um, and I think that the Christmas story of God coming into the world as a baby, that story actually shed some light on the question of, where are you, God? Believe it or not. last year, well, actually this year, earlier during Easter, as I was studying for the sermons that I preach on Good Friday and Easter, I was reading this book by a philosophy professor at Calvin named James K. Smith. And he's kind of like talking about different themes in the work of St. Augustine. And, one of the chapters in the book is about the problem of evil. And he says, like, that evil is such an unthinkable thing that it literally makes no sense. Like part of the frustration that we have to talking about evil and suffering and pain is that there's this dissonance in our minds that how can that possibly be? And I remember reading this thing that they found fascinating and very insightful. He says, when you think about it, God doesn't offer us an answer to evil and suffering. And the point he's making is that God never kind of like, the Bible doesn't seem to be interested in offering a satisfactory explanation as to why God allows evil to exist, why God allows suffering to happen. But he says what God does do, though, is that he gives a response to evil and suffering. And obviously the response that God gives to evil and suffering is his son, Jesus Christ. Which is where the Christmas story kind of like connects, right? Because the Christmas story is the beginning of God's response to the evil and the suffering that we see around us. And what's interesting about that response is how it begins, because it's not a response of God flicking a wand or snapping his fingers and just making everything right, like the Avengers in Endgame, that like you can just put on the gauntlet and flick your fingers and everything flips. That's not how God works. God sends his son, who we also believe is God, as a baby in the most vulnerable state, but also in the most vulnerable state that he comes into the world as one of us. That God's first instinct in the midst of our suffering and our pain is not to just fix it away or explain it away or anything like that. It's actually to join us in that suffering, to join us in that experience. God comes as one of us and he feels like us. He sees the world the way we see it. He understands the world. He experiences the world. We experience the world. He suffers in the same way as we suffer. One of the prophecies of the Messiah, the prophecies of Jesus, says that he is a man of sorrow, acquainted with suffering. And that was a little bit morbid. But I've actually found a lot of comfort in those words and in that image. Because when I ask God, where are you? A lot of the times I'm not necessarily asking, where are you, God? I'm asking, why aren't you doing something? Like it's almost like a part of me, and this might not be you, but it's definitely me sometimes. I feel like I don't necessarily want God. I don't necessarily want God's companionship or relationship. I want God to work for me. I want God to make this problem go away. And once he makes that problem go away, he can go away too if he wants. Like, we're fine. I just want my problem taken care of. That's normally what I'm asking when I'm asking God, where are you? And God doesn't seem that interested in answering that question. But when I'm asking actually, God, where are you? And I'm actually looking for God, for God's presence, for God's companionship, God offers his son and the fellowship of his suffering, as the Apostle Paul would say. The Christmas story is God answering the question, God, where are you? And it's not a warrior that shows up. It's not a politician that shows up. It's not a magician that shows up. It's a baby. One of us. That looks like us, talks like us, walks like us, experiences the world like us, suffers like us. God's response to suffering is solidarity. And it's easy to sometimes think about that in kind of like macro terms, but I want to invite you today to think about in your personal terms, that what if the Christmas story is a story of God entering into the world and honestly entering into your life to sit with you in the midst of your pain, and to sit with you in the midst of your suffering, and to sit with you in the midst of your loneliness and your anger and your confusion, your depression, whatever else. The Christmas story is ultimately the story of God showing up and says, listen, I'm just going to be here with you while you go through this. It's divine solidarity. It's God joining us. It's God telling us, you're not alone. And nothing that happens to you alone. It also happens to me. And I'll be honest, that doesn't just make all of the problems appear, right? We're 2 years into this thing, and every time that we think we're like out of the woods, something else happens, and it's kind of like, you know, that the meme from The Godfather 3. Like every time I think about it, pull me back in, and every time we think we're out of, you know, in the clear with this, something happens, and it feels like we're back at March of 2020. And I don't know what the end result is. I don't know where things are going. And honestly, I don't know what God is ultimately doing through this, or what God is allowing this. I don't know. I don't have the answers to that. But what I believe is that if the Christmas story is true, and I believe it's true, then we're not alone in this. Some of us, last 2 years, we're literally alone, right? We're literally isolated at home, not seeing anybody. Some of you might be like that right now. And what I want to tell you is, wherever you are, in whatever situation you find yourself, however difficult it might seem, however painful it might seem, if the Christmas story is true, you're never alone again. The companionship of God, the fellowship of God, the love of God has come into the world through Jesus. The prophet says, to us a child is born, to us a son is given. God gives us himself to be with us. Now this is the thing, that's not where the story ends. It's not that just God sits with us in our suffering. It's that through that relationship, through that companionship, through that solidarity, is that eventually God is going to deal with all of the brokenness and the pain in the world and bring history through the right conclusion, and honestly bring our lives to our ultimate home that is in him. But what you see today is that fixing doesn't happen without God joining us in our life before. And sometimes what happens is that we want to get to the fixing without the dwelling. When I get to the fixing without actually just experiencing the companionship of Jesus. And maybe tonight, maybe for some of you tonight, it might be like a difficult night, a painful night, a lonely night. Maybe tonight your problems won't go away. God won't just flip a magic wand and make everything right. But maybe tonight God wants to hold your hand through the tears. And God wants to hold your hand through the anxiety or the panic or the depression or the sadness. And honestly, I don't want to be super gloomy. Maybe for some of you tonight, it's a great night. And listen, God wants to be with you in your joy and your happiness. Like through all of the spectrum of human emotion, like God is there with us. When the angel shows up to Joseph in the Gospel of Matthew, you know, the angel tells him, like, don't leave Mary didn't cheat on you. Like, God miraculously helped her conceive. She's going to have a baby. When Jesus is born, what the text says is that they call him Immanuel. And then in parentheses, which means God with us. Jesus is God with us. And in these moments of confusion and anxiety and fear, that's what we need. We need somebody to be with us in there, to sit with us in our frustration and our confusion and our pain. And the one that sits with us is the one who is the author of life, the one who is the source of everything, the one who has conquered sin and death. The one who sits with us in our pain is the one that has not only the power but also has promised that he will bring an end to suffering and pain. Where has been God through all this time? With us. With us, sitting there. We might not see him, we might not be aware of him a lot of times. Sometimes we ignore him, sometimes we don't want to pay attention to him because we want him to do something different, but all of that, God is with us. If Jesus has come into the world, God is with us. God is with you. And friends, my hope and my prayer is that tonight of all nights, you would know that God is with you. And that you would experience the presence of God. And that you would experience the love of God. And that would take you through the night. That would take you through the week. That would take you through next year. That the presence of God would be with you. And that presence will give you hope. And that presence will give you joy. That all the things that we celebrate at Christmas, that they can be true, even if it doesn't feel like they are, even if everything around us looks like it cannot possibly be. If God is with us, we're going to be okay. If God is with us, everything is going to work out. If God is with us, this is not the end of our story. If God is with us, evil doesn't have the last word. Pain doesn't have the last word. Suffering doesn't have the last word. And that, I think for me this year, is the message of Christmas. God is with us. And we're not alone. So my brothers and sisters of Encounter, may you know that you're not alone. That God has sent his Son into the world to be with you. And to carry you through the difficult times of life. And to be with you in the good, joyful times of life. May you experience God's presence and God's companionship. And may you know that to us, a child has been born and a son has been given. Grace and peace and Merry Christmas. Hey everybody, before we go, I just want to give you a couple of announcements. Number one, this coming Sunday, December 26th, we are not having an in-person service or an online service. We never have service the last Sunday of the year. For us, it's kind of like a time to, give a rest to all the volunteers that make Encounter happen. So there's nothing. We just hope that you spend time with your family and enjoy that. And then the following Sunday, January 2nd, we are having a service. It's only going to be an online service. Honestly, we planned this just because normally people are still traveling back home, January 2nd from the holidays. But honestly, now with the rise of the Omicron variant, it also makes sense to maybe, try to not have to gather necessarily. at least in the next 2 weeks. So our hope is that the following, so the January 9th, we're meeting again in person and online. We're actually back at our church office on Columbia Heights, 3400 11th Street. If you were part of our church before COVID, that's where we used to meet. We're meeting back there weekly starting January 9th in 2022. Really excited for that. And the final thing is, it's like the end of the year is part of what we do, our year-end giving campaign. And, this year has been crazy. It's really difficult and challenging. And we're looking at next year, and, we need the flexibility to allow us to make some moves. Like the idea of moving back to the office, that incurs some costs and some challenges. And we want to be able to make that happen. And it's your generosity that allows that to happen. So if we want to invite you to pray and seek God and consider if you can, contribute to the work of Encounter beyond your normal tithes and offering, to special year-end gift that helps, continue carrying the message of Jesus in our city. And in our neighborhood. So those are the short announcements. We have a couple of Christmas songs that we recorded last year that we're putting back in this video. So stick around, watch that, and enjoy. Merry Christmas.
Stars are brightly shining. It is the night of our dear Savior's birth. Long lay the world in sin and error pining, till He appeared. The soul felt its worth, a thrill of hope. The weary world rejoices, for yonder breaks a new and glorious morn. And Christ was born. Truly He taught us. Truly He taught us to love one another. His law is love, and His gospel is peace. Chains shall He break, chains shall He break, for the slave is our brother, and in His name all oppression shall cease. Sweet hymns of joy in grateful chorus raise we, let all within us praise His holy name. Christ is the Lord. Oh, praise nations prove the glories of his righteousness and wonders of his love and wonders of his love and wonders of his love.
We're going to sing He Rules the World again.
He rules the world in truth and grace
And makes the nations prove the glories of his righteousness
and wonders of his love and
and wonders of his love.